First Minister, just back to the events over the weekend, what impact will the gatherings at Ibrox and George Square have on the easing of lockdown restrictions? Is there a chance that any speeding up can now be completely put out of the picture? And just secondly, I appreciate it's already been touched upon, but there's obviously a lot of anger to do with the way that the police handled the situation by not breaking it up when it was a clear breach of lockdown restrictions. What's the point in the police having the powers to fine people when only 7 were handed out?
I'll ask the Chief Medical Officer to say a few words about the implications of the events at the weekend, possibly on the prevalence of the virus and the impact on relaxing lockdown. But just let me say that you are familiar with the judgments that the government makes on all of these questions. We have said that we will be driven by the data. If the data goes in the wrong direction because of what went on at the weekend, that will have an effect on our decision making, because we've been absolutely transparent about this, that it will be the data that drives our decisions. So if the data suddenly, because of all that commotion at the weekend, goes in the wrong direction, we'll have difficult decisions to make as a consequence. So there are consequences flow from all of these events. I'll maybe invite Gregor Smith to just add some comments to that, and then I'll come back to the policing question.
Lindsay, it sows a seed of doubt in my mind just now, because at this moment in time, it's going to be a further 2 to 3 weeks before we really see the impact of what happened over the weekend translating through in terms of the data that we see. So as we begin to assess what happens next following the last relaxation of the restrictions 2 weeks ago, it will be towards the end of this week that we really get a firm sense as to what the return of these school groups has, how that's impacted fully over the infection rates. And likewise, what we saw at the weekend will be another further 2 to 3 weeks before we can properly assess what impact that has in terms of increasing the rate of infection. But one thing I would bear in mind as I give you this answer is that central belt, the areas in Glasgow and immediately around Glasgow, Lanarkshire, Ayrshire, Forth Valley and some parts of West Lothian as well. These have been areas that for many, many months have shown higher levels of background infection within the communities than other parts of Scotland. And so whenever you see large groups of people coming together like this, there is always the risk that that's going to cause an uptick in infections again. So we'll be watching very closely over the next 2 to 3 weeks to see exactly what impact that has had on the infection rates that we're seeing across that central belt area.
And then to come back to your point, Lindsay, about policing, obviously the police engage in advance of any event of this nature to try to create the circumstances that can avoid events of the weekend happening. So there was dialogue beforehand to try to avoid all of that happening. When people gathered in this fashion, the police have got difficult and sensitive operational judgments to make about what's best to do in certain circumstances where lots of people gather. And there are options available to the police, and these are operational judgments for police officers to make. And it's not for me, as a government minister, to say what those operational judgments should be. But they are difficult, and I think we all acknowledge that. I think what the police have also done, in the course of the weekend, 28 people were arrested, 7 people were issued with fixed penalty notices or will be the subject of a report to the Procurator Fiscal. So the police have clearly taken action in relation to particular individuals, and they've made judgments about the way to handle these particular events, and there will be further dialogue between the Government and Police Scotland about how we can address these issues at any future occasions that take their course. Can we now move to Nicole Cassells of